everybody, Armoured PANTZ here, and I have another Advanced Blitz gaming tutorial for you. This time we're looking at Advanced Heavy Tanking, or how to be the steel wall. Being the steel wall, being the anchor for your team, getting that steel wall medal and really making a difference during the game. Now, before I start, let's just say this is another of our giveaway videos. So there's going to be a code one here, one of the 8 spooky Halloween code words myself and Little Finger have together. All you have to do is find a word, comment, and put your IGN and server that you play on into the comment section. All the links to the YouTube channels and Discords which you have to join to enter will also be in the description. Now, moving on with the video itself. So this is advanced heavy play, right? So I'm going to assume that you know how to play a heavy tank. You know how to side scrape, you know how to angle, all these things. If you don't, please go and watch one of the one of the basic heavy tank guides that we have here on channel, or on somebody else's channel, but you need to know the basics because this is advanced, as I said. Now, this is about being the tip of the spear. So in the heavy tank guide, we say that you are the tip of the spear. This is about being the tip of that tip. And it only applies really to certain heavy tanks, right? You can't do it in every heavy tank. So the Chieftain, which we recently reviewed, you can't do it in that, right? Basically, you need to have a really heavily armoured beast that can side scrape, that's going to be an angling monster, because that's what you need. That's the tool you need. And we described when we looked at the advanced scouting, you need a toolbox. Because you're going to take the fight to the enemy, right? You are going to put yourself in harm's way. You are going to take a much more dangerous path in the game than you would normally do, right? So as with all games, you need to check the setup first. What we're particularly looking for is Unicum, Super Unicum, or Unicum clans on the opposite team. Because if they're there, then you may need to play a little bit more cautiously, right? Because you're going to go for this steel wall medal, right? Now, I'm not going to say you're going to get it, but that's our ambition. We want to go, we want to take the fight to the enemy. We want to anchor our team by seizing a strategic part of the map. And we are going to put ourselves in harm's way, right? We are going to purposely put ourselves in harm's way to attract enemy shells. Why? Well, firstly, we want to seize an important part of the map. So in this map here, we're going towards C. We are going to try to seize the corner of the map here just before C, which is key part of the map for the heavy tank channel, but also it's a key part of the map for anchoring your team, right? Now, the VK that I have here is one of those tanks, right? Other tanks that can do this are the E100, right? The mouse, the IS-4, etc. You need a heavily armed tank, right? And you can see what I'm doing here is pretty simple, right? I'm pushing on, I am attracting the enemy shells. Why? Because basically I know I can get some bounces. But here's the other thing, right? And this is the part of this game which is maybe the most, say, commensurate with advanced gameplay, is that you are thinking holistically. You are not thinking about your play or about your own hit points, right? So what do we mean by holistic? Well, what we mean is, if you attract the enemy's fire, right? Firstly, it means they're not firing at your allies. Secondly, it means you are a distraction to them. So as we discussed in the advanced spotting guide, by giving them an, let's say, unexpected factor into their gameplay, which they weren't counting on, by you just pushing straight at them like this, it interrupts their gameplay and their game plan. It causes them to reassess and it causes them to make mistakes, right? The other thing is, right, if you have 3 or 4 of the enemy firing at you at one time, and you're in a heavily armoured tank like this, they all won't pen you. It's not possible because there are only 1 or 2 vulnerable parts of this tank, and if everybody's firing at that vulnerable part, and particularly if you're moving and angling, then they are not going to be all able to pen you, right? Now that has a double whammy effect on your team, and that double whammy effect is this: if somebody is firing at you and not penning, not only are they not taken away from your hit points, there's also another fundamental advantage. They're not taking away from your team's hit points. Now, when we talked about game philosophy in one of the other advanced guides, what we spoke about was that whole concept that the team pool of hit points. When that goes to 0, unless of course you're playing Supremacy, but generally when that goes to 0 you lose. So if you conserve your own hit points or conserve those of the team, you are basically having a double whammy, a double impact on your team's success and your team's ability to possibly win, right? So, what we're looking at here is a great example of this tip of the spear. I've put myself in harm's way, right? But I have confidence in my tank, I have confidence in the ability to angle, etc. and to get those bounces. But even if I die, I have basically enabled my team to gain a huge advantage, and I have fulfilled my role. And we're going to have a look here that you will see that the steel wall badges here. Huge amount of bounces in that game. And I don't know how much attention you were paying, but basically I blocked over 4,000 damage in that game and did almost 4,000 damage. So it's an 8,000 net damage contribution. And that's basically what being the tip of the spear is about. That 4,000 damage that I absorbed, that I bounced, imagine that had been on my other teammates and had penned, we might have lost that game. So that's what it's about, right? Now, there's another concept I want to, which I often use in this game, which you may or may not be familiar with, but I want to introduce it to you here just in case you are not. And it's the difference between active and passive angling. So what's active angling? And we saw some examples of both active and passive angling in the previous game, right? So active angling is where you see the enemy, where they are, where they're going to fire, and you move to create that acute angle where they then can't pen and they bounce because you have created higher relative armor numbers. Passive angling is when you are not aware of where the enemy is or where they're going to fire. So they can be at the side or at the back of you. But you're in a tank that has tough, strong armor. And when you're moving to actively bounce other shots, you actually get other bounces. But you're not playing for those bounces. So basically that's passive angling. A good example of what I mean by that is, have you ever come up behind a mouse or on the side of a mouse? You have a shot, you're about to fire, it's going to be an easy pen, but then suddenly he moves because there's a tank in front of him and he moves to engage that tank. You fire and his movement has created an angle that then bounces your shot. Now he's not even aware that you're there. And a mouse is a perfect example of that because it's such a heavily armored tank that slightest movement can create those different angles that allow those bounces. So that's the difference between active and passive angling, right? Now, you need a tank like the VK here that has this armor profile, or a mouse or an E100 or an IS4 that allows this both active and passive. Because when you put yourself into harm's way, like I'm doing here, going straight up in front of the enemy, right? I'm presenting myself as a target. I want them to focus fire on me. You can't engage them all, right? You can't possibly angle up to the 3 or 4 tanks at one time, right? So therefore you need a tank which is also going to give you passive angling as well, right? And this tank is great for that. As I said, is the E100, the mouse IS4. Therefore, if you want to play this advanced heavy tank play, you also need to carefully select a tank you're going to use, right? If you use a chieftain or something like that which doesn't have the really strong frontal armor you need, then you're not going to be able to do it, right? This gameplay here is really for your quintessential heavily armed frontline main battle tank, right? When you select that type of tank, then you are able to execute this type of strategy, right? So it's about tank selection as well as understanding the gameplay and what you're trying to do. Perfect scenario unfolded for me there in that game because you know, I came up against their medium tanks, and that is manna from heaven when you're in a tank like this, right? Because they're going to find it, there's only certain spots at the front of the tank that they can pen, and if you're moving around, etc., they're going to find it difficult. Plus, When you get into their face and you push onto them, it creates a bit of panic on their side, and they don't carefully select their shots as they should. And that's basically what you want to do. You are being a disruptive influence on the enemy. You're getting in their face, you're doing something unexpected. You're presenting yourself as a target, putting yourself in harm's way. But then, by doing that, creating the anchor or the foundation around which your team builds the win. And in the case of this game, another big contribution to the team with 6.6k of net damage, 4.4k of damage dealt, 2.2k of damage blocked, and seizing that strategic position in the map. But look, this type of play, getting that steel wall, is not for everybody, right? Because, let's have a recap and discuss why. Because you're going to be tip of the spear, right? You're putting yourself in harm's way. You're actively, positioning yourself to be the anchor for the whole team, but you're actively putting yourself in the enemy's fire line, right? You are going to take hits. You're, putting yourself in harm's way. In a way, you're kind of a sacrificial lamb. But it's a really, really important job to play. And if you play it well, it's very effective and can be the difference between winning and losing, right? It's also about cumulative or net damage count, right? So it's not only about the damage you do, it's about the damage you absorb, because every hit that comes at you is not going towards your team. But look, this is advanced gameplay, it's not for beginners. If you're not an experienced heavy tank player, you don't understand how to play heavies well right now, don't do this, because you're going to go front on and die, right? And you're going to complain and going armored. That strategy was just bullshit, right? So, this is for taking your play to the next level. Now, the music, by the way, was Holtz. Gustav Holtz, Mars, the bringer of war from the Planet Suite, which I thought was quite apt for this particular type of gameplay, because you are the bringer of war when you're the tip of the spear. By the way, if that music sounds familiar to you, but you haven't listened to Holtz before, if you've seen the movie Gladiator, then it's because they completely ripped off the music for Gladiator, particularly in the fight scene in the Colosseum when the chariots attacked them. Nothing like a bit of plagiarism of an already dead composer. But I digress. I guess now all that remains for me to say is cheers much, thanks for watching, I hope you found it useful, I hope you found it enjoyable, and I guess now all that remains for me to say is pants off.
That's all, folks.